Tom Riddle's journey did not begin with dark magic. It began with terror. A child raised in a Muggle orphanage, aware from his earliest years that death came for everyone around him, he looked at mortality the way most wizards look at dementors, as something to be escaped by any means necessary. By the time he called himself Voldemort, the terror had calcified into doctrine. He would not die. He would find a way to make certain of it. That drive mirrors the motivation D&D assigns to the Lich. The Monster Manual and Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes both describe the Lich as a spellcaster who refuses to accept the end of their existence. They do not stumble into undeath. They pursue it with intention, conducting rituals of extraordinary complexity and cost, binding their soul to an object so that even the destruction of their body cannot kill them. The refusal of death and the hunger for continued power are not incidental traits. They're the defining logic of the Lich as a creature, and Voldemort's reasoning follows them exactly. The Phylactery and the Horcrux. The central mechanic of the D&D Lich is the Phylactery. A Lich creates this object through ritual, binding their soul to it so completely that the soul cannot pass on to the afterlife when the body's destroyed. As long as the Phylactery survives, the Lich cannot be permanently killed. Destroy the body and the soul retreats to the Phylactery and begins reforming a new physical vessel nearby. Ending a Lich permanently requires destroying both the Phylactery and the body. The Phylactery alone being gone does not kill the Lich, but it means the next time the body falls, the soul has nowhere left to anchor itself. Voldemort's Horcruxes operate on exactly this principle. A Horcrux is an object into which a wizard has placed a fragment of their own soul. The act of creation requires murder, which fractures the soul, and then specific dark magic to push the shard outward and anchor it inside a container. As long as the Horcrux exists, the wizard who created it cannot fully die. Their body may be destroyed, their power reduced to almost nothing, but they persist. The terminology differs, and so does the precise mechanism. A D&D phylactery anchors the Lich's entire soul to the object, preventing it from passing on to whatever lies beyond death. A Horcrux works differently. A piece of the soul is physically torn away through the act of murder and sealed inside a container, leaving the remainder in the creator's body. One tethers the whole, the other splits the thing apart. But the outcome both systems produce is the same. As long as the container survives, destruction of the body cannot permanently end the creator. Where Voldemort diverges from standard Lich lore is the quantity. A D&D Lich creates one phylactery. The ritual is described as extraordinarily dangerous, requiring a spellcaster of exceptional power to survive the demands of binding at all. Voldemort created 6 intentional Horcruxes: the ring that belonged to Morvolo Gaunt, the diary he enchanted as a teenager, the locket hidden in a cave on the British coast, the cup of Helga Hufflepuff, the diadem of Ravenclaw concealed inside Hogwarts, and the snake Nagini. A 7th fragment, the piece Harry became when the killing curse rebounded, was accidental. No D&D Lich in the core rulebooks attempts this. Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes describes the process of binding the soul to a phylactery as inherently corrupting, something that leaves the caster diminished in ways that often refuse to acknowledge. Voldemort did the analogous thing 6 times deliberately. What does the fracturing cost? D&D Lich lore treats the phylactery ritual as a transaction with lasting consequences. The spellcaster gains deathlessness, but the process of binding the soul corrupts something in the caster over time, warping the personality and thinning its connection to mortal concerns until the creature becomes genuinely alien, no longer governed by the same drives and fears that shaped it as a living person. This is visible in Voldemort across both timelines of his story. The teenage Tom Riddle who created his first Horcrux was already changed by the act of killing. By the time he returned to Hogwarts years later to apply for the Defense Against the Dark Arts position, the transformation had already gone well past human. Dumbledore describes him as entering the room with a face white as a mask, red eyes with slitted pupils, his features no longer those of the handsome boy he had been. The Voldemort who returned at the end of the Triwizard Tournament was something that resembled a human body, mainly in outline. white, flat-featured, with slitted pupils and hands like a snake's. His face had lost its nose. Mordenkainen describes liches who have held phylacteries for centuries as increasingly detached from the world, incapable of emotional connection and indifferent to everything that once motivated them as living people. Voldemort follows this trajectory. He cannot love and cannot understand why anyone would die for another person. That incapacity is the wound that kills him at the end. The Wraith State. When the killing curse rebounded off Harry Potter in Godric's Hollow, Voldemort's body was destroyed. What remained was not a corpse. He describes his own survival in terms that align perfectly with what D&D describes when a lich's body is destroyed while its phylactery survives. For over a decade, Voldemort existed as a spectral presence. He possessed animals. He found a vessel in Quirrus Quirrell, a Hogwarts professor who had sought him out in Albania, drawn there by ambition and destroyed by it as his body degraded steadily under Voldemort's occupation. Voldemort had no stable form of his own and could not act in the world without a host. His power had collapsed to almost nothing. He was waiting. D&D treats this condition as the natural consequence of phylactery-based survival. The soul retreats to the phylactery, intact but cut off from the physical world, and gradually begins reconstituting a new body. The 5e Monster Manual puts this as up to 10 days. What matters is that the soul persists, and without the phylactery to anchor it, that persistence would end. One distinction the comparison requires: D&D liches cannot leave the phylactery unattended indefinitely. The 5e Monster Manual states that the lich must periodically trap souls within the phylactery to sustain itself. Fail to do so and the lich begins its slow degradation into something worse. Voldemort's Horcruxes demanded no such maintenance. Once made, they simply existed, requiring nothing further from their creator. That makes Voldemort's arrangement more stable in this specific respect than a standard lich's. Voldemort's time in the Albanian forest fits the wraith condition closely. Reduced to something between death and life, he clung to existence through the Horcruxes scattered across Britain, waiting for a loyal servant to help him rebuild his body. The ritual in the graveyard at Little Hangleton is the lich's reconstitution given a specific magical mechanism. Bone of the father, flesh of the servant, blood of the enemy. These are components of a resurrection ritual, but they function narratively the same way as a lich's gradual physical reconstitution does. The soul returns to a rebuilt body, and the Dark Lord walks out of the fire again. The question of undeath. There's a meaningful distinction between Voldemort and the standard D&D Lich worth addressing directly. A Lich is undead. The ritual of becoming a Lich requires the wizard to die, for their body to cross the threshold into undeath before it can persist in its new form. Voldemort's body after the graveyard ritual was living tissue. He had a heartbeat, he had blood, Harry's blood flowing through his veins. This places him closer to what Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes describes as an intermediate state in the Lich transformation. A caster who has completed the soul binding but has not yet crossed fully into undeath. The body still lives. The soul is already partially removed from it, split and anchored in external objects. That middle state is actually more precarious than complete lichdom in one key respect. The Lich who has finished the transformation has a clear ontological status and a stable relationship between body and soul. Voldemort's soul was too fractured to sustain normal life and too distributed across external objects to die cleanly when his body fell. The killing curse should have ended him. The 6 Horcruxes protecting him at any given moment were the only reason it didn't. The Demilich Shadow. When Voldemort was in his reduced form, barely a shade clinging to the forests of Albania, his condition bore a resemblance to the Demilich. A lich that has failed to feed souls to its phylactery and paid for the neglect with its physical form. The 5e Monster Manual states that Lich must periodically trap souls within the phylactery or face deterioration. A Lich that goes without begins to degrade, its body crumbling away as the soul retreats inward. What eventually remains is an animated skull, typically with gemstones set into the eye sockets. It's the iconic image of D&D's most decayed form of undeath. Voldemort's wraith state was not a permanent Demilich condition, because he had the means and the will to rebuild. But the creature Harry hears described, nursing itself back to power in a dark forest, too diminished to show itself, dependent on possessing animals just to survive, is the portrait of a soul that has overextended itself. He had split himself so many times that the fragment remaining in him was barely enough to sustain coherent thought. Acererak, the most infamous Demilich in D&D lore, represents the far end of this trajectory. He originates in Gary Gygax's Greyhawk setting, introduced in the 1978 Tome of Horrors as a spellcaster who had so thoroughly severed himself from physical existence that nothing remained of his body but the skull, preserved as the focus of his continued consciousness. Where Voldemort's degradation was forced and unwanted, Acererak's was deliberate, the result of a lich pushing past even lichdom into something further. Both figures illuminate the same principle, that the further a dark spellcaster pushes the boundaries of soul manipulation, the less human the result. The destruction problem. D&D liches are notoriously difficult to kill permanently because of the phylactery. Standard combat achieves nothing lasting, destroying the body only buys time. To truly end a lich, you have to locate and destroy the phylactery before, during, or after killing the body, or the lich simply reforms. The campaign against Voldemort follows the exact logic. Dumbledore spends years locating each Horcrux before attempting to destroy it. Harry, Ron, and Hermione spend most of the final year hunting the remaining Horcruxes rather than pursuing Voldemort directly. Killing Voldemort while a Horcrux remained intact would have accomplished nothing. He would have simply returned. The methods by which Horcruxes are destroyed also parallel D&D's treatment of phylactery destruction. Phylacteries are constructed to survive. The 5e Monster Manual describes them as small metal boxes inscribed with sigils, built to outlast ordinary attempts to damage them. The methods that work against Horcruxes are similarly exceptional. Basilisk venom and fiend fire appear in the books, and the Sword of Gryffindor is established as one of the few objects capable of the task. Ordinary spells reflect off them. They require something either primally destructive or enchanted beyond ordinary means, which is precisely the level of effort D&D demands for phylactery destruction. The driven archmage. One final element completes the comparison. D&D liches are a specific kind of undead. They're spellcasters of the highest order, typically wizards who have achieved exceptional arcane mastery before their transformation. A lich carries its magical knowledge and its goals intact across the transition. Death does not reset the creature, it extends it. Voldemort was the most naturally gifted wizard of his generation. He mastered spells as a teenager that most adult witches and wizards never learn. He achieved true flight without a broom or enchanted object, something considered impossible within the magical world. His legilimency was precise enough to tear through another mind in seconds. His command of the dark arts put him in a category his contemporaries could not reach. He is the benchmark against which all others in his era are measured. That combination, extraordinary magical power fused to a soul-anchoring mechanism that prevents permanent death, is the exact combination that makes a lich what it is. The specific flavor of that power in Voldemort's case is drawn from the wizarding world's internal rules, rather than the Forgotten Realms, but the underlying architecture's the same. The phylactery mechanic and the soul-anchoring logic at the heart of it, all of it finds a counterpart in something D&D has spent decades building lore around. Tom Riddle became something that D&D has a name for. A wizard who looked at death and decided to build a cage around his soul so it could never reach him. The cage had 7 doors, and every one of them had to be broken before the Dark Lord could die.